They laughed at us. They genuinely, openly, and without a shred of doubt, laughed at the notion of humanity standing against them. The Xylos' hegemony, masters of 1,000-star systems, whispered tales of their impenetrable defenses, their star-forged alloys, their energy shields that could turn supernovae into a light show. They said no weapon could break them. They said the galaxy had failed to produce such a weapon for millennia. The galaxy perhaps did fail. But humanity? Humanity just built 10, and then we brought them to their doorstep. This is the story of how the laughter died, how the galaxy learned fear, and how 10 human-forged artifacts carved a new future from the ashes of old arrogance. Music fades out completely. The year was 2342 by old Earth reckoning, though such dates held little meaning for the Xylos' hegemony. Their civilization measured its age in cycles of celestial alignment, each cycle spanning millennia. They were ancient, powerful, and utterly convinced of their own divine right to rule. From the gleaming spires of their capital world, Xylos Prime, to the farthest mining outposts on desolate, icebound moons, their dominion was absolute, or so they believed. Humanity, meanwhile, was still struggling to find its footing on the galactic stage. We had spread to a mere dozen star systems, our FTL drives relatively slow, our ships armed with plasma cannons and kinetic slug throwers that were considered quaint by Xylos standards. We were, in their lexicon, a Tier 3 nascent species, barely worth monitoring, certainly not worth fearing. Our first true contact with the hegemony wasn't an invasion or a diplomatic summit. It was a misunderstanding, tragic in its simplicity, devastating in its consequences. A human exploration vessel, the Voyager's Hope, a ship designed for deep space cartography, stumbled upon an uncharted nebula. Within that nebula lay a Xylos research outpost, hidden, clandestine, engaged in experiments that violated every known galactic ethical charter. The Voyager's Hope, following standard protocols, hailed the outpost. The Xylos, paranoid and secretive, saw only a threat. They didn't even bother with a warning shot. A single, perfectly aimed energy lance tore through the Voyager's Hope's bridge, vaporizing the command crew instantly. The rest of the ship, adrift and silent, was swiftly boarded, its crew taken prisoner. When the news reached Earth, it wasn't through Xylos channels. It was through the frantic, garbled distress signal from the Voyager's Hope's automated black box. Ejected moments before the bridge was struck, its sublight comms array broadcasting on a rarely used civilian frequency. It took weeks for the signal to be deciphered, weeks for the horror to sink in. Our people murdered, our ship destroyed. For merely existing in a place the Xylos considered their secret domain. Diplomatic overtures were, of course, the first response. The newly formed United Earth Alliance, still proud of its democratic ideals, sent envoys to Xylos Prime. They were met with contempt. The Xylos ambassador, a towering reptilian being named Cathar, whose scales shimmered with an unhealthy purple hue, spoke with a voice like grinding stones. "Your vessel trespassed," Cathar hissed, his multiple eyes narrowing at the human delegation. It was dealt with. Consider it a lesson. A lesson? Demanded Ambassador Elena Petrova, her voice trembling but firm. You murdered an unarmed research crew. You destroyed a civilian vessel. Cathar merely shrugged, a motion that rippled through his thick armored hide. Collateral damage. The cost of learning your place, little ones. The insult was palpable. The hegemony does not negotiate with insects. That was the line. Insects! Petrova, a veteran diplomat who had faced down corporate titans and planetary despots, felt a cold fury settle in her stomach. She knew then that words would not suffice. She returned to Earth, the bitter taste of defeat and humiliation heavy on her tongue. Her report to the United Earth Alliance Council was stark. They will not listen to reason. They view us as vermin. They will not stop until we are either eradicated or enslaved. The Council was plunged into crisis. Humanity had never faced an existential threat of this magnitude. Our military was laughably small compared to the hegemony's might. Our technology, while advanced by our own standards, was decades, perhaps even centuries, behind theirs. Conventional warfare was suicide. Panic began to spread through the human colonies. Some advocated for immediate surrender, hoping to appease the Xylos and perhaps preserve some semblance of autonomy. Others called for a desperate, last-stand defense, knowing it would be futile but preferring death to subjugation. But humanity, in its darkest hours, has always found a way. It has always, when pushed to the brink, unearthed a spark of ingenuity, a reserve of stubborn defiance that baffles even the most ancient of species. This time, that spark ignited in a place few expected, a forgotten research facility on the Martian moon of Phobos, where a team of eccentric, brilliant, and utterly unconventional scientists had been toiling in obscurity for decades. Dr. Eris Thorne, a theoretical physicist whose wild, unkempt white hair often made him look like a mad prophet, was the head of Project Chimera. For 30 years, Thorne and his team had been working on what the wider scientific community considered a pipe dream, exotic matter manipulation. They weren't building weapons, not in the traditional sense. They were seeking to understand the fundamental fabric of reality, to bend its rules, to unlock the universe's deepest secrets. Their work was abstract, arcane, and expensive, often ridiculed by mainstream science. But now, with the Xylos threat looming, Thorne's theories suddenly looked less like pipe dreams and more like humanity's last. Desperate hope. "We cannot fight them with plasma cannons," Thorne declared to the assembled military and scientific minds in a hastily convened briefing on Phobos. His voice, usually soft and academic, now carried an unusual gravitas. "Their shields, their armor? They are designed to withstand anything we can throw at them. Their ships are virtually invincible." He paused, letting the grim reality sink in. But invincibility is a relative term. General Ava Rostova, a hardened veteran of the Outer Rim skirmishes, narrowed her eyes. "What are you proposing, Doctor? Some kind of miracle weapon?" Thorne smiled, a thin, almost ethereal expression. "Not a weapon, General, a solution. For 30 years, my team has been exploring the concept of material destabilization through localized reality distortion. We call them chimeras." He gestured to a holographic display that shimmered into existence, showing complex theoretical equations and abstract energy patterns. Imagine a localized field, sustained for mere picoseconds, that causes the fundamental atomic bonds of a target material to unravel. Not an explosion, not a physical impact, but a sudden, catastrophic molecular disintegration. Silence descended upon the room. The implications were staggering. "You're saying you can just make things unexist?" whispered a young scientist, her voice barely audible. "In theory, yes," Thorne replied, his eyes gleaming with a manic intensity. "It requires an immense amount of energy and precise calibration. We've only managed to achieve it on a microscopic scale in laboratory conditions. But the principles are sound, and if we can scale it up, even to a small degree, even a small degree could punch a hole in a Xylos dreadnought," Rostova finished, a flicker of grim hope in her eyes. "How many of these chimeras can you build?" Thorne looked at his team, then back at Rostova. "With every resource humanity can spare, and with round-the-clock work, we believe we can produce 10 functional prototypes. 10 devices, each capable of generating a destabilization field strong enough to tear through Xylos' defenses. But they will be single-use. They will be immensely powerful but incredibly delicate. And getting them close enough to a Xylos ship, that's our problem," Rostova stated, a fierce determination replacing the earlier despair in her voice. "Your job, Doctor, is to give us those 10 chimeras. My job is to make sure they reach their targets." And so began the impossible project. Every shipyard, every research lab, every available engineer and scientist was redirected to Phobos. The human colonies, united by the common threat, poured their resources into Project Chimera. Factories that once produced luxury goods now forged exotic alloys and fabricated intricate energy conduits. Mining operations worked double shifts to extract rare isotopes needed for the Chimera's core. It was a race against time, a desperate gamble. The Xylos, complacent in their superiority, continued their slow, methodical advance, unaware that the insects they so disdained were forging the very tools of their undoing. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months. The Xylos hegemony, having established a forward operating base in the Cygnus Arm, began to exert its influence, demanding tribute, claiming systems, preparing for the inevitable pacification of humanity. Their probes reached the outer edges of the Sol system, observing, cataloging, assessing our meager defenses. They saw our patrol ships, our orbital platforms, our planet-based energy cannons. They dismissed them as primitive. They continued to laugh. On Phobos, the 10 chimeras slowly took shape. They were not sleek, elegant weapons. They were brutal, functional, almost alien in their design. Each device was roughly spherical, about 2 meters in diameter, covered in shimmering crystalline conduits and pulsating energy cells. They hummed with barely contained power, radiating a faint, unsettling aura that made nearby instruments flicker and hum. The 48-hour ultimatum expired in a chilling digital countdown that echoed across the Sol system. As the final second ticked away, Xylos Prime Fleet Admiral Thakon, a colossal, heavily armored Xylos with a reputation for ruthless efficiency, issued the order from his command ship, the Invictus. Begin the pacification protocols. Target planetary defenses. Show them the true might of the hegemony. Across the system, thousands of Xylos warships surged forward. Energy lances lanced out, striking human orbital platforms and ground-based defenses. The bombardment was devastating, overwhelming. Our meager shields buckled, our energy cannons were silenced. But even as our defenses crumbled, they fought back with a ferocity that surprised the Xylos. Every human soldier, every pilot, every technician knew this was it. They were fighting for their home, for their species. Below the surface of Phobos, however, a different kind of battle was about to begin. The 10 stealth ships of the Vengeance Squadron, carrying their precious and deadly cargo, launched silently from their hidden bays. Jax Ryder, at the helm of the Dauntless, led the formation. Their mission, to slip through the Xylos blockade, bypass the hundreds of patrol ships, and reach the 4 largest Xylos dreadnoughts, including the Invictus, Thakon's flagship, as well as several key command vessels. Each ship carried a single chimera destined to rewrite the rules of galactic warfare. Status report. Jax's voice was calm, steady, belying the knot of tension in his gut. Stealth fields nominal. Commander, replied Lieutenant Lena Hansen, his co-pilot and navigator. Her fingers danced over her console, monitoring the intricate sensor ghosting. We're showing minimal energy signatures. They haven't detected us yet. Good. Maintain course. Stay tight. Remember the training. Jax kept his eyes fixed on the star-dusted void ahead, a void now increasingly filled with the massive, ominous shapes of Xylos ships. Their strategy was audacious, almost suicidal. They would exploit the Xylos' overconfidence. The hegemony believed no ship could penetrate their blockade without being vaporized. They believed their sensor nets were infallible. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The Vengeance Squadron weaved through the outermost layers of the Xylos fleet, their advanced stealth technology working wonders. They mimicked stray asteroids, matched the radiation signatures of distant nebulae, becoming mere whispers in the vast symphony of space. Xylos patrol vessels, massive and ponderous, passed within kilometers, their powerful sensors sweeping the void, yet detecting nothing. The human pilots held their breath, every muscle taut, every nerve screaming with the effort of maintaining absolute precision. As they approached the inner defense layers, the density of Xylos ships increased exponentially. Here the challenge became not just evasion, but prediction. Lena's navigation skills were put to the ultimate test, plotting complex trajectories that exploited the tiny gaps in the Xylos patrol patterns, anticipating their sweeps, dodging their automated defense drones. Hard to port, Commander. Incoming sensor pulse, 0.3 seconds. Jax reacted instantly, his ship banking sharply, the G-forces pressing him into his seat. The ghost of a Xylos sensor pulse washed over where they had been moments before. Close one, Lena. Nice call. Thanks for trusting me, sir, she replied, a faint smile touching her lips. The camaraderie among the Vengeance Squadron was forged in the crucible of impossible odds. They were more than just colleagues. They were a family, facing oblivion together. Behind them, the other 9 ships followed flawlessly, their pilots veterans of countless drills, their reactions honed to razor-sharp perfection. The technician in Jax's ship, Corporal Ben Carter, a young man barely out of the academy, but a prodigy with exotic matter, monitored the Chimera. Its internal energy readings were stable, its crystal conduits humming with suppressed power. Chimera's green, Commander. Ready when you are. Almost there, Ben. Just need an opening. Jax glanced at his tactical display. Their targets were now visible, immense dark silhouettes against the distant sun. The Invictus, the Khan's flagship, was a monstrosity, nearly 20 kilometers long, a city in space, bristling with weaponry, its shields shimmering with raw power. Getting a Chimera close enough to that behemoth seemed utterly impossible. Suddenly, a crackle filled their comms. Vengeance 2 to lead. We've got a problem. Xylo's heavy cruiser directly in our path. Too large to bypass without a signature spike. Jax's mind raced. They couldn't afford to be detected now. They were too close to the core fleet. Vengeance 2, can you go around? Negative, lead, it's too tight. The cruiser's deploying a new sensor web. A cold dread washed over Jax. This was it. The mission could end here, before it even began. He looked at Lena, then at Ben. All right. New plan. Vengeance 2. Hold your position. We're going to create a diversion. A diversion, Commander? Lena questioned, her brow furrowed. How? We engage one of their smaller patrol ships, Jax explained, his voice grim. It'll draw attention. Create a momentary gap in their sensor coverage. It's a risk, but it's our only shot. But engaging means losing our stealth, Ben pointed out, stating the obvious. Exactly, Jax confirmed. One of us has to sacrifice their stealth, draw fire, and then get out. It'll give the rest of you the window you need. He looked at Lena. Lena, open a channel to the squadron. Tell them what we're doing. Ask for a volunteer. Lena hesitated for only a second, then nodded, her fingers flying over the console. Moments later, a chorus of voices filled their comms. Vengeance 5, volunteering lead. Vengeance 9 here, I'm in. Let me do it, Commander, my ship's faster. Jax listened to the eager, defiant voices of his comrades. He hadn't expected anything less. This was humanity. He made his decision. Vengeance 3, you're up. You've got the fastest re-engaging stealth field. Create a feint, draw a single patrol ship, then disengage and re-stealth. The rest of us will use that window. Do not engage longer than 15 seconds. Understand? Understood, lead, came the crisp reply from Vengeance 3, piloted by Captain Maya Sharma, a young woman known for her daring maneuvers. Good hunting, everyone! With a sudden burst of speed, Vengeance 3 broke from formation, its stealth field momentarily dropping as it powered up its sublight thrusters to maximum. The Xylo's patrol ship, a relatively small but heavily armed destroyer, immediately registered the anomaly. Its energy shields flared, and a volley of plasma bolts lanced out, narrowly missing Vengeance 3. Maya, with astonishing skill, executed a series of impossible barrel rolls and evasive maneuvers, drawing the destroyer further away, creating the precise gap Jax needed. Now, Jax commanded. Full power. Through the gap! The Vengeance squadron surged forward, their stealth fields struggling to cope with the sudden acceleration, but holding. They streamed through the momentary void created by Maya's courageous diversion, slipping past the heavy cruiser and into the deeper layers of the Xylo's fleet. As they cleared the immediate danger, Jax heard Maya's voice, strained but triumphant. Vengeance 3 successfully disengaged. Re-stealthing now. Good luck, team. A collective sigh of relief, quickly suppressed, went through the squadron. They had made it through the first major hurdle, but the greatest challenge still lay ahead. Their targets were the largest, most heavily shielded ships in the Xylo's fleet, surrounded by their own dedicated escorts and defense drones. Lena, plot insertion points for each target. Minimum range for Chimera effectiveness is 200 meters. We need to be closer than that to guarantee a breach. Understood, Commander, Lena confirmed, her display glowing with intricate orbital mechanics and target projections. The Invictus will be the toughest. Its internal shields are layered. Then we'll hit it with everything we've got, Jax vowed, his jaw clenched. The squadron dispersed, each ship peeling off towards its designated target. Jax, with Lena and Ben, steered the Dauntless towards the colossal Invictus. The sheer size of the Xylos flagship was awe-inspiring, a testament to a civilization's engineering prowess. It felt like approaching a small moon, a moon that was actively trying to kill everything around it. Defense drones active around the Invictus, Ben reported, his fingers dancing over his console, cross-referencing Xylos sensor frequencies with human-developed counterscans. They're configured for microsignature detection. Our stealth field might not hold up against them at close range. Then we go in fast, Jax decided. Maximum velocity. We punch through their drone screen, drop the Chimera, and get out. The Dauntless accelerated, a black arrow hurtling towards the behemoth. As they closed the distance, the defense drones, small, agile, and heavily armed, began to react. Their targeting lasers, usually precise and deadly, flickered erratically as the Dauntless's stealth field struggled to maintain its integrity against the intense energy output. "They're getting a lock!" "Partial target acquisition!" Lena cried out. Jax gritted his teeth. "Hold on, evasive maneuvers!" He threw the Dauntless into a series of gut-wrenching twists and turns, dodging incoming laser fire that scored deep gouges in the void around them. The ship shuddered under the strain, its internal lights flickering. "They're still on us, Commander," Ben yelled, his voice strained. "We're almost at drop range!" "Now, Ben!" Jax roared, pushing the ship into a final desperate lunge. Ben slammed his hand down on the activation console. The aftermath of the Chimera strikes plunged the Xylos hegemony into utter disarray. Admiral Thakon, reeling from the catastrophic damage to his fleet and the unthinkable loss of his flagship, could barely comprehend what had just transpired. The concept of a weapon that simply unmade matter, bypassing energy shields and conventional armor as if they didn't exist, was alien to Xylos science. Their entire understanding of warfare, predicated on superior firepower and impenetrable defenses, had been shattered in a single brutal volley. "Damage reports. I want full damage reports from every sector." Thakon's voice, usually a calm rumble, was now a rasp of barely contained fury and fear. He paced the emergency bridge of the crippled Invictus, its remaining sections still operational but effectively out of the fight. Vilak, his tactical officer, projected a grim holographic display. "Admiral, 4 of our primary dreadnoughts are completely neutralized. 3 heavy carriers have ceased to function. 2 critical command vessels are offline. The total loss of life? Estimates are in the millions, sir." Thakon stared at the display, his multifaceted eyes unblinking. Millions. Just moments ago, he had been confidently preparing to wipe humanity from the stars. Now his fleet was decimated, and he had no idea how it had happened or how to stop it from happening again. "The stealth ships," he finally managed to say, his voice strained. "Were any of them apprehended?" "Scanned? Anything?" "Negative, Admiral," Vilak reported, shaking his head. "Our remaining patrol ships are reporting scattered contact, but the human vessels are too fast, too agile. Their stealth fields are damaged, but they're still able to evade our targeting systems. They simply disappear. We have no wreckage, no discernible weapon signature beyond the initial devastating effect. This was the core of the problem. The Xylos had no data, no intelligence on the Chimeras. They couldn't analyze the weapon, couldn't develop countermeasures. It was like fighting a ghost, a silent killer that left only a void in its wake. Meanwhile, on Phobos, the remaining elements of the United Earth Alliance military were celebrating, cautiously. The Vengeance Squadron, all 10 ships had returned, battered and scarred, their stealth fields flickering, but fundamentally intact. The pilots, exhausted and emotionally drained, were greeted as heroes. Jax Ryder, his face streaked with sweat and grime, stumbled out of the Dauntless to the embraces of his fellow crew members and the stern but proud nod of General Rostova. All Chimeras deployed successfully. "General," Jax reported, his voice hoarse. 10 targets neutralized." Rostova clapped him on the shoulder, a rare display of emotion. "You've done it, Commander. You've given us a chance. But this isn't over. The Xylos will regroup. They'll be looking for answers." "And countermeasures," Thorne added, his eyes, usually distant, now focused with a renewed intensity. He had been observing the debriefing, his mind already racing ahead. "We've shown them our hand. Now they'll adapt. We need to be ready. Indeed, the Xylos' hegemony was adapting, albeit in a state of growing panic. The Khan issued new orders. All remaining capital ships were to deploy maximum energy shielding, layered and reinforced. Patrol patterns were tightened, sensor sweeps intensified. He also ordered the activation of Phase 2 Contingency, a desperate measure that involved awakening ancient Xylos war machines. Colossal automatons designed for planetary siege, which had lain dormant for millennia. These Goliath units were not susceptible to biological weapons, and the Khan hoped their sheer kinetic power and redundant systems would make them immune to the human unmaking weapon. The next phase of the conflict became a cat-and-mouse game across the Sol system. The Xylos, now cautious and wary, tightened their cordon around Earth and Mars. Their remaining ships, though fewer in number, were deployed with a new strategic depth, focused on defense and counterinsurgency. They also began deploying the Goliath units. These machines, towering constructs of reinforced Xylos alloy, began their slow, inexorable advance towards the human planets. They moved with a terrifying inevitability, their massive energy cannons charging, ready to unleash torrents of destruction. Humanity, however, had also learned. The chimeras were one-shot weapons. They had been used to devastating effect, but they were gone. Now humanity had to rely on its ingenuity, its courage, and its newfound understanding of the Xylos' weaknesses. Project Chimera had not just produced a weapon, it had forced humanity to innovate on every front. The Xylos had believed that the only way to attack their ships was to punch through their shields and armor. But what if the attack didn't come from the outside? Dr. Thorne's team, working with the military, began to develop a new tactic. They had analyzed the residue of the Chimera's effect, observing how it caused localized reality distortion. They theorized that similar, but less destructive distortions could be used for other purposes. The result was Project Echo. It wasn't a weapon, but a tactic of infiltration and sabotage. Small, human-piloted drones, equipped with miniaturized reality distortion emitters, were designed to create brief, localized phase shifts. These shifts would allow the drones to literally pass through Xylos' energy shields and even solid hull plating for fractions of a second. Once inside a Xylos ship, the drones would release a swarm of nanobots, tiny machines programmed to sabotage critical systems, disabling internal power conduits, corrupting navigation data, overheating weapon systems, or even opening airlocks in non-essential sections. The Vengeance Squadron, now renamed the Echo Wing, were repurposed to deploy these drones. Their stealth ships, though no longer carrying chimeras, were still our fastest and most elusive. Their pilots, hardened by their previous mission, embraced this new, equally dangerous challenge. Jax Ryder, now a celebrated war hero, found himself leading the first Echo Wing mission. Their target, a Xylos logistics hub, a vast space station responsible for resupplying the Goliath units. "All right, team," Jax's voice was calm over the comms. "Remember the briefing. We're not destroying this station. We're crippling it. Our drones need to get in, do their work, and get out. No unnecessary engagement. Stealth is paramount." The Echo Wing approached the logistics hub, a massive spinning edifice that dwarfed even the largest Xylos capital ships. Its defenses were formidable, a web of laser grids and patrol fighters. But the Xylos, still reeling from the Chimera attacks, were focused outward, expecting another devastating strike from the void. They weren't looking for tiny, phase-shifting drones slipping through their defenses. "Approaching outer perimeter," Lena reported, her eyes glued to her scope. "Deployment window in 15 seconds. Hold steady." Jax brought the Dauntless into position. The Echo Wing ships formed a tight formation, then dispersed, each heading to its designated entry point. As Lena counted down, Ben, the Chimera technician turned drone specialist, activated the drone launch sequence. A series of small, dark pods detached from the Dauntless's underside, each containing a swarm of sabotaging nanobots. The drones, barely visible even to their human operators, approached the station's energy shields. For a terrifying fraction of a second, the energy of the shield flared, reacting to the reality distortion. Then, with a barely perceptible ripple, The drones passed through, vanishing inside the station's massive structure. Inside the Xylos logistics hub, chaos slowly began to unfold. Internal security cameras flickered offline. Airlocks hissed open, venting atmosphere in non-critical sections, creating localized depressurization. Power conduits overloaded, plunging entire sections into darkness. Weapon systems on docking fighters began to register critical errors. Admiral Thakan received frantic reports from the logistics hub. "Admiral, their power core is fluctuating. Navigation systems are corrupted. Fighters are reporting weapon malfunctions." "What is happening?" Thakan roared, banging a scaled fist on his console. He was no longer just afraid. He was frustrated, baffled. Is it another of their unmaking weapons? "Negative, Admiral," Vlak replied, his voice strained. "Our internal sensors are detecting micro-anomalies. Tiny energy signatures. It appears to be sabotage, but how? Their ships are outside our shields." Thakan felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. The humans weren't just capable of immense destruction. They were also cunning, insidious. They were adapting, fighting in ways the Xylos had never considered. Their concept of honorable direct combat was being shattered by human ingenuity. The Goliath units, however, continued their slow, relentless march towards Earth. These were different. They were massive, automated, designed for brute force. Their thick armor, powered by internal fusion cores, was believed to be impervious to anything humanity possessed. And they were too large, too heavily shielded, to be susceptible to the Echo Wing's infiltration tactics. This brought humanity to its next great challenge: how to stop an unstoppable force. Dr. Thorne, working with military engineers, proposed a radical, risky solution. If the Chimeras could unmake matter, perhaps a scaled-down version of their technology, used in reverse, could reinforce matter, create an impenetrable barrier. This led to Project Aegis, not a weapon, but a defense. Engineers would take the remaining exotic matter and refined energy sources used in the Chimera project and construct 10 massive fixed-point Aegis projectors on Earth and Mars. Admiral Thakan was a broken Xylos. His once unshakable confidence had been replaced by a gnawing fear, his tactical brilliance by frantic desperation. The Chimeras had decimated his fleet, the Echo Wing drones were sowing chaos and paranoia, and now the Aegis projectors had rendered his ultimate weapons, the Goliath units, utterly useless. He was losing, and he didn't even understand how. Humanity was fighting a war on principles completely alien to the Xylos. "Vlak, pull back the Goliath units," the Khan finally ordered, his voice devoid of its usual authority. "They're just sitting targets. Redirect remaining forces. Establish a tighter cordon. We need to cut off their supply lines, starve them out. There has to be a limit to what these humans can do." His plan was simple, brutal, and conventional. If they couldn't breach human defenses, they would simply isolate them. The Xylos fleet, though heavily damaged, still numbered in the thousands. They began to implement a complete system-wide blockade, cutting off all trade routes, all communication, all potential for humanity to receive external aid or resources. They intended to choke humanity into submission, a slow, agonizing death. On Earth and Mars, humanity braced for the siege. The Aegis projectors, while effective, were a massive drain on resources. Sustaining them indefinitely was impossible. Food and medical supplies were rationed. Energy production was prioritized for defense. The civilian population retreated into underground shelters, living in a constant state of anxiety, but also defiance. General Rostova, observing the Xylos blockade, knew that a prolonged siege was a death sentence. Humanity couldn't outlast the hegemony. They needed another decisive blow, a final game-changing gambit, and this time it would require the ultimate sacrifice. Dr. Aris Thorne, his face gaunt from lack of sleep, approached Rostova with a new, terrifying proposal. "General, we've analyzed the Xylos Goliath units. Their internal power cores are immensely powerful, self-sustaining fusion reactors. If we could overload even one of them, the resulting explosion would be catastrophic. It would create a chain reaction that would likely disable, if not destroy, every other Goliath unit in the system." Rostova's eyes narrowed. "And how do we overload an impervious Goliath unit, Doctor?" "The Aegis projectors can only absorb energy, not reflect it. And the Echo drones can't breach their armored core. Precisely, Thorne replied, his voice soft but firm. Which means we can't do it from the outside. We have to do it from the inside. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. We need to put a Chimera-like device, albeit a highly modified one, inside a Goliath unit's core. Not to unmake it, but to disrupt its fusion reaction, causing it to self-destruct. Rostova stared at him, a cold dread creeping into her heart. You mean a pilot? A suicide mission, Thorne nodded, his gaze unwavering. One pilot, one specially designed, miniaturized Chimera device, calibrated for a highly localized, precise energy surge. They would have to guide their ship directly into the core access port, eject the device, and then, well, there would be no escape. The room fell silent. This wasn't just dangerous. It was a guaranteed death sentence. A single pilot, alone, facing the most heavily armed and armored war machine the Xylos possessed, with no hope of survival. This was the ultimate sacrifice. Rostova didn't hesitate. She knew what it meant. She also knew humanity's history. When faced with annihilation, there were always those who stepped forward. She put out the call again for volunteers. She didn't expect many. She expected a handful of the most desperate, the most suicidal. She received 1,000 applications within hours. Jax Ryder, without a second thought, was among the first to volunteer. "General," he said, standing before her, his posture ramrod straight. "I led the Vengeance Squadron. I brought the Chimeras to their targets. Let me finish what we started." Rostova looked at him, her heart heavy. Jax was a hero, a symbol of hope. To send him to his death. "Commander, your skills are invaluable. We need you to lead the Echo Wing, to guide our remaining forces." "General, with all due respect," Jax insisted, his eyes burning with a fierce determination. "This mission requires someone who understands the Chimeras, who knows how to get past Xylos' defenses. And it requires someone who is willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. That's me, General." He paused, his voice softening. "Let me do this. For Earth. For everyone." Rostova studied his face, seeing not just a soldier, but a man driven by an unyielding purpose. She knew she couldn't deny him. "Very well, Commander," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You have your mission. But know this. Humanity will never forget your sacrifice." The modified Chimera device, now called the Phoenix Core, was small, sleek, and pulsed with a faint internal light. It was designed to be launched from a specialized drone, but the drone itself needed to be delivered to the Goliath unit's internal core access, and that meant getting a human ship, again, through Xylos' lines. Jax's ship for this final mission was a stripped-down, heavily modified shuttle, barely more than a cockpit and an engine, its hull reinforced with experimental alloys. It was designed for one purpose, to deliver the Phoenix Core. Lena Hansen, his loyal co-pilot, had begged to go with him. He had refused. "This is a one-man mission, Lena. You're needed here. You'll navigate the rest of the Echo Wing. Make sure my sacrifice isn't in vain." Their farewell was brief, choked with unspoken emotion. As Jax boarded the shuttle, the reality of his mission settled in. He was going to die, but he was going to die fighting, for his home, for his people. And that in itself was a victory. The final phase of the human counteroffensive began. The remaining Echo Wing ships, led by Lena Hansen, launched a massive, coordinated diversionary attack against the Xylos blockade. Their drones flooded Xylos sensor nets with false positives, created localized power surges, and caused minor but widespread chaos. This was to create the precious window Jax needed. Admiral Thakon, seeing the renewed human aggression, assumed it was another desperate gambit, another attempt at sabotage. He committed his remaining fighters to engaging the Echo Wing, unknowingly drawing them away from the Goliath units. "They're trying to distract us," Thakon snarled. "Don't let them. Maintain the blockade."